I've been lucky to work for some great organizations throughout my career, being a part of scale and multiple acquisitions and a lot of impact working with some great teams. Most of my career and a lot of the experiences I'll draw from today come from my time at Indeed.com, the first mission-driven company I joined. While at Indeed, we saw crazy growth and scale, and for many of us, we were kind of figuring out the job on the fly. I personally found myself growing from one PM, the only PM on our employer team, a team of just four, to building employer products and moving into a product director role, working with over 200 people in Austin and Seattle and Tokyo to build products used globally by employers to help find their next hire. In 2019, Indeed reached 10,000 employees, and I found myself with another opportunity to join another local, here in Austin, mission-driven company, Ambertha. Ambertha is a B Corp that focuses on connecting people in need with services that can help them. Think food banks and shelters and financial assistance. Ambertha also provides care management tools to nonprofits, social workers, and case managers. I joined Ambertha as the VP of product development, focusing on setting up product engineering and BI orgs for scale. And in my almost 2 years here at Ambertha, we've grown our product development org from 12 people to over 50. And we've grown our users by over 200% in that time. A really quick plug, we are still growing and we're hiring PMs and engineers, so don't hesitate to reach out. Why should you entertain me in these ideas? Why is my perspective maybe relevant to you? I'm going to go through some thoughts on and sort of a framework about how I think about product trade-offs. And here's who I think these might be relevant for. First, if you work at a company where the purpose is delivering some measurable value to the end user that is not revenue, where that North Star value, it's typically going to compete either directly or indirectly with revenue, whether in decision-making, resource allocation, or strategy. Basically a mission-driven company. I really like working for companies that fall in this bucket, and I have experience building teams that make good trade-offs. You can't ignore revenue as a clear driver of the business, but you don't want to chase it and forget about your mission. There are a lot of great companies that exist to make revenue as kind of their core thing, but here we're going to talk about my perspective from mission-driven companies. Also, I'm going to talk a bit today about data. So using data to make your business decisions is a key part to make this work. Next, the business models kind of have to match up. The experiences and examples I'm going to go through today will have measurable outcomes of when the value to the end user and other business drivers like revenue can actually be impacted through product changes. And in some cases, even impacted at the same time. And these perspectives are driven by having impact, not so much about just building things. And lastly, I don't believe in oracles. I'm going to talk today about things that worked for me in the situations I was in when I was in them. These might work for you in a similar situation or even a different situation. These might not work for me if I were to try them again today. As we know, things are constantly changing. So we're going to start with a step back. In order to make a trade-off, you first have to know what we're trying to accomplish. So as a company, what are you trying to achieve? What value-add impact on the world in the lives of users are you driving towards? At Indeed, it was really simple. We help people get jobs. Similar for Ambertha, we help connect people in need with services that can help them. For the purposes of having kind of a generic example today, I'm going to exploit my dogs, Bashi and Blanco. We're going to make up a fake company as we walk through this. So we're going to talk about Bashi and Blanco's dog walking marketplace. This is our fictional mission-driven business where I'm going to apply some of the things that I've learned at Indeed. So Bashi and Blanco are really worried about dog exercise. They're North Star, similar to Indeed helping with jobs and Ambertha helping connect people. Their North Star is getting jobs more exercise. And they believe that by powering an internet marketplace that facilitates walks, they're fulfilling this mission. So their mission, get dogs exercise, measured by completing walks. To support their business, they make a commission off the walks they facilitate. So they make some revenue off of all these completed walks. So to help myself and to help Bashi and Blanco and my teams make trade-off decisions, it's really important that we set the ground rules up front. And by ground rules, I mean the goals of our company, the goals of our teams, and the general what-if decision tree we want our teams to follow. Without clearly defined goals, your teams will be lacking the scaffolding to scale and to have impact. You'll be directing a lot more energy towards communication instead of execution. So clear goals will help give teams ownership and autonomy and allow them to do their part in achieving the mission. So let's go ahead and set up Bashi and Blanco's company goals. As a company, we've already established their North Star, dog exercise. Our first goal should be something we believe that if we achieve it, we're moving closer to our North Star. In our case, we've established Bashi and Blanco believe they are helping dogs get exercise when they complete walks. So we're going to set a goal of 1 million dog walks for our example. And we know we need revenue to support our business. And so Bashi and Blanco aren't allergic to revenue. They know they need it to pay their employees and to keep their software going and to continue to serve their mission. So to continue growing at the impressive rate that they are, let's set a goal for $5 million in revenue. So quick note, I'm making some assumptions about my example company. First, it's fairly mature in that it can set achievable goals. It's also mature in that it understands its business levers, so it can help make a strategy to help hit these goals. So our basic strategy that Bashi and Blanco are following is we need more dogs, we need more walkers, and we need more bookings of walks to be able to hit these goals. So with all this background in place, we can finally start actually talking about trade-offs. So when I think of a decision that a product manager working for Bashi and Blanco has to make that might involve a trade-off, I generally think of them in 3 buckets. First, what problem should we solve? Second, how should we build it? And third, how do we make a decision after it's built? So to answer these questions, we're going to go through and create a guide or a decision and trade-off matrix that we're going to use to answer these questions. And first, we're going to use it to answer the question, what problem should we solve? So we could work on anything. We could build an Apple Watch app or interactive kiosks for bus stops. How do we point our efforts in a way that helps us focus our teams in the areas that are most likely to impact the number of walks completed and the amount of revenue Bashi and Blanco make? That's our goal. Those are our goals. So let's imagine a grid of all the possible outcomes of everything we could want to work on. So if we have our 2 goals, walks and revenue, we should be thinking about our ideas with those goals in mind. How do we think each idea we have will impact walks, and how will it impact revenue? There are things we could work on that might have a positive impact on the number of walks, like and a negative impact on revenue. For example, a free walk promotion or a discount. So we place those ideas here on this part of the grid. There are also things we could work on that have a really positive impact on revenue, but a negative impact on walks. Like if we increased our price beyond what some percentage of the market is willing to pay. And we'd put those ideas here on the grid. The goal is to identify the problems to solve that stick in the topmost and the rightmost areas, staying away from cool ideas that won't meaningfully impact your business and staying focused on your value add and your business driver. To place your initiatives on the grid, you'll first need to understand your business levers and what a product change might actually do to those metrics. For example, our free walk coupon. By understanding our users and deciding who and when this coupon is available for, we can really change where the possible outcome might be. Targeting new users, targeting active users, or churned users, all have a different hypothesis and a different likely outcome. As a PM, you're the owner of your business drivers. When you come up with an idea, focus on modeling what that change you make to your product might do to these business goals. I like to place stickies on the grid that represent our ideas, like our free dog walk. Another thing to think about is, if we're successful with this, what would we do next? And cluster those together. So get all your ideas, all your variations up on the board, and you can kind of see where they fall and what impact you think they might not have, or might have, sorry. It also might not be simple to place your ideas in just one box. A product manager might argue that our prices are so low right now, we wouldn't lose any walks by increasing them. It's okay for ideas to span boxes, just be honest with yourselves. So as you're coming up with ideas, as you're thinking about things you might want to work on, there are some rules before you can place them on this grid. First, they should be simple ideas. They need to be able to be estimated, both in terms of impact and effort. They aren't a stretch to directly impacting the goal, and the team needs to be capable of executing on the idea in a reasonable amount of time. Second, the team should be able to control them. They should be realistic, no 100% conversion rates, or you don't need the stars to align. You need to move a metric you own that matters. And success needs to be defined ahead of time. If our idea to get more walks through a coupon doesn't lead to more walks, we should move on. A good example that follows these rules might be our free dog walk coupon delivered via email for owners whose last booking was 30 days ago, with a goal of increasing number of walks. Some common pitfalls to watch out for and some bad examples include, first, generic strategies. We're not placing an idea as generic as get all the dog walkers and all the dogs to use our site. That's a long-term strategy and obvious. It's not something that helps your team with short-term execution. We're also focusing on the things we can control. We can control things like conversion rates in our funnels, marketing spend, or the product experience. We can't impact metrics like the number of walkable days by focusing our efforts on trying to control the weather. Another common pitfall is and statements. For example, maybe we think a big place we can have impact is by selling add-on services. In order to prove this, we need to get walkers to agree to list and perform additional services, and we have to get users to purchase the services. We might end up building a lot of things before we have any indication if this is likely to help us achieve our goals. There are a lot of ways to approach this, with qualitative research, serializing the work by focusing on one side first, or delivering a full vertical user story. And the last pitfall is trying to impact everyone and using that as a blocker for any impact. For example, maybe we have an idea that might not be relevant to senior dogs, and it's kind of obvious that it's not. It's a new product that's only good for puppies and younger adults. For Hank here, we know that that won't have a positive impact on our senior cohort, but that shouldn't stop us from exploring the positive impact it could have for the population as a whole. Often the most impactful things will be generally impactful first. Once you've identified some problems to solve, look for high impact items that might be low on effort to execute on. Those items might not always be in the top right box. It's great when we have ideas that we think are going to move both our revenue metric, our business metric, and our value metric walks. But those are typically low-hanging fruit and handled quickly. And so you'll start to see more and more of these ideas kind of filling in those middle and outside boxes. As organizations grow and mature, it's natural the organizational design starts to follow the clusters of work that are geared towards similar impact. These might represent a team that owns our search and checkout experience, or a team that owns walker registration. This is actually a great way to balance the impact focus of your teams between value and business metrics through headcount allocation. Smaller companies often won't have the luxury and instead focus on alternating focuses based on progress towards each goal, usually aligning that with planning periods. So if you do quarterly planning or half-year planning. For the next bucket of trade-offs, let's imagine we've picked a high impact initiative and we're trying to answer how we should build it. There are a lot of ways to build software, but I'm going to approach this from an iterative perspective, which is aligned with my experience. These types of trade-offs are really ones we deal with every day as PMs. It's not, I don't think, very specific to mission-driven companies. They're not particularly unique, so I'll move kind of quickly through this bucket of trade-offs. My first piece of advice here is get a good engineering partner. I've been really lucky, really fortunate to work with some great ones that have helped me break down what I want to learn in simple, quickly executable chunks of work. And that leads to the next thing, break the problem down. If there are multiple questions we need to answer, going back to our idea of add-on services, we identified the need to answer a couple of questions. Will walkers perform extra services? What services should we offer? Will users purchase these services? Which question is our first bottleneck? And do we have any other information that could help us answer these questions? Qualitative research, market research, what competitors are doing, all might inform how we approach solving this problem. Engineering effort and speed to delivery for everything we could do also plays a really big role here. A common tool I'm sure everyone's seen is a value versus effort chart. Working with engineering to place these high impact initiatives against how hard it is or how long it would take to build them. Maybe we could quickly add a survey question embedded in our walker experience, asking them if they're interested in performing additional services to make extra money. Or maybe we could deliver an entire vertical user story that offers only one extra service for both walkers to sign up for and dogs to book. How quickly you can learn and get value should be a key driver of this decision. And the last thing is think ahead to, if this was successful, here's what I do next, whether that's adding more services or moving from the survey to actually building the marketplace. Also think about if this fails, here's what we'd learn and we'd want to try next. And don't forget to think about when is it time to stop, especially if you're working on initiatives that are kind of stacked together, knowing when it's time to throw the towel in, or you've had enough impact there. You could do an entire series of talks around breaking down problems and thinking about these things, but I'll keep moving to our last bucket of trade-offs. How do we decide if it worked? So if we're building things iteratively and maybe even A/B testing, we can measure the impact against our hypothesis. I don't want to get into the pros and cons of A/B testing and measuring, but I'm going to assume that Boschi and Blanco are super data-driven. They want us to point to the things we're doing that are impacting our goals. So in our scenario, we decided to execute on an initiative that we thought would have the biggest impact on revenue, and hopefully a neutral to hopefully not negative impact on number of walks. It was low in engineering effort. It had an opportunity for a big payoff quickly. How do we set our team up to decide if that initiative was successful? What happens if revenue goes up 10% and walks goes down 10%? What happens if revenue goes up 100% and walks goes down 50%? These are questions leaders can think through ahead of time to avoid having intense opinion-based trade-off discussions with everything you do. It's extremely common when running tests that metrics and KPIs will move in different directions. We can use our trade-off matrix and improve it to set our organization up to make decisions quickly. So let's add our trade-off limits that we find acceptable. So for our dog walking business, working with Boschi and Blanco, we find we'd accept a 5% increase in walks at the expense of a 5% decrease in revenue. Our value trade-off here, we're saying, is 1-to-1. As an organization, we can define these rules ahead of time. Sorry, I already said that. Inversely, we'd accept a 1% loss in walks for a 5% gain in revenue. So this type of clarity helps our teams focus on hypotheses that live within these parameters. ideas will get more aligned to big impact in driving your value metric. Here, no one's going to bring ideas that are a revenue gain for equal value loss. They're going to bring those big ideas that might have a negative impact on walks, but are going to have a really big positive impact on revenue. And you're setting them up to think about those ideas before they actually start the work. Some organizations might even want to get more specific and cover more scenarios, turning the possible outcomes into a chart so they can more easily make decisions. In this example, again, we've skewed our decision matrix towards our mission statement, favoring walks over revenue. At Indeed, we often experience this when balancing the number of jobs posted on the site versus revenue. So here, let's run through our example of add-on services. So we have a hypothesis. By offering add-on services to a walk, users will spend more money on our marketplace. We think this is going to help us drive revenue. We ran a simple test by delivering a full vertical user story, offering dog massages for purchase. After letting the test run, we had statistically significant results. We increased revenue by 5%, but we hurt the number of walks by 2%. And after talking to our users, we found out that our walkers had less time to accept walks since they were spending so much time massaging dogs. Glancing back at our trade-off matrix and looking at our results, we can see we can't accept this trade-off. And after presenting our results, Bashi and Blanco agree, massages are not dog exercise, and the revenue from them is not more important than helping other dogs. It's worth noting here, this example, again, is most relevant to a mature product and organization. Often when making these trade-offs, teams won't have statistically significant data that's going to span both metrics. In cases where that decision might not be clearly defined or statistically significant, make the facts as visible as you can and lean on your managers and your executive team to help make those trade-offs. Also, many times a single team's metrics would even have been abstracted a layer away from those company goals, like growing the number of walkers or focusing on a funnel conversion rate. In cases where your team is abstracted a layer, build the trade-off matrix that makes sense for you. What lever do you control, and how does that lever impact the company goals? For example, if my team owned adding new walkers to the platform, I might know that the number of walkers will impact the number of walks. I could replace walks versus revenue trade-offs with walkers versus revenue. And lastly, these aren't living artifacts. As the company grows, you need to revisit your trade-off matrices and make sure they still make sense. Market changes like competitors and saturation might change the sway of trade-offs you're willing to make. And also the things you learn might change that. But by thinking through what could happen and creating the framework for you and your teams to follow, you're setting yourself up for easier decision-making and scale. For Bashi and Blanco, who are really passionate about dog exercise, they're continuing to sway their trade-off towards that value metric, but they did some really important things to set their teams up to make good data or good trade-offs. The first thing they did was set clear goals that are a reflection of their value and what they need to keep their business running. The second thing they did was prioritizing their ideas by impact, thinking about how the products they build are likely to change their business levers with everything they do. They set the trade-off ground rules before they started the work, and they focused on balancing that focus through organizational design or shifting focus by planning periods, keeping that trade-off matrix alive. Cool. So 24 minutes, I did it, just under the gun there.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Matt. I love the examples and getting to know your dogs. I hope it's a successful company. I hope everyone in the audience also enjoyed the examples and just the visual representation of how the trade-off metrics works. If you have any questions for Matt, please drop them in the chat. And of course, we invite you to unmute yourself and also ask your question directly. And I wanted to start by talking about the acceptable trade-offs, Matt. How often do you recommend reviewing the matrix? And you said it's better to review it on an ongoing basis. As the company grows, are there any phases that you would recommend to review them and make sure that everyone's aligned?
Yeah, I think we actually had a really good discussion in the meet and greet earlier about a PM who it was Felix who's on this call, who learned he had a metric that was abstracted a layer, and learned something about his metric where he believed initially that it was impacting the value metric of the company, but learned it actually wasn't. And that was a really good point for him to make that case to go ahead and change that trade-off matrix and change the focus of what that team is focusing on. And so I think depending on the pace of the company, you're setting yourself up to learn things at different times. And anytime you learn something, I think it's an okay time to say, is this still right? And so whatever that might mean for you, a lot of companies do quarterly planning these days, and that's usually a good point to do it. So you're not constantly moving people around, and allowing a few times to focus on actually trying to move those metrics in the way that you've established and you've laid that framework for.
That makes sense. And what would you recommend for more fragmented teams where you run an experiment and the work that you're doing might impact other teams, but you might not have set those boundaries ahead of time?
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things that led us to setting these boundaries, was running into that a lot at Indeed. Especially as we grew, we were able to have a lot of very focused teams on either a specific metric or a specific conversion rate. And we started seeing a lot of this downstream impact. I think the important thing was, especially as these teams might be abstracted a layer from the core value metric, being consistent about how everyone can influence those core value metrics. So at Indeed, we were responsible for job postings. So jobs was kind of our common denominator across what all the teams were doing. And so we could use that as a shared language between the teams to build that trade-off matrix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, so find your least common denominator.
Yeah, perfect. If you have questions, drop them in. I do have a couple more, but please type them in the chat if you have anything that you would like to ask Matt directly. Another thing I was wondering, in your presentation around common pitfalls, you mentioned generic strategy is one of them. Do you think that's that's something that the leadership team should take care of? But if they don't, do you think it's in the hands of the PM to actually make it a bit more precise and not as generic?
Yeah, I actually find that leadership teams actually have the hardest time putting the stickies on the board, because they focus too much on those big generic strategies, and often will come in and be like, well, this is obvious, we have to do this and this, right? When those really broad generic things aren't helping teams execute. But I think as a PM in any organization, when the strategy is not defined, taking it upon yourself to define it and just throwing it up and seeing if it sticks is always a good strategy.
We have a question from Lisa in the chat. How and when would you pivot away from a path based on your metrics matrix? Sure.
So I think on a couple of those slides, we showed kind of those clusters of stickies, and that was meant to illustrate kind of an idea that might have a bunch of iterations with it. I think if you're trying, like, we often don't know how volatile a lever might be until we really try experimenting with it. Like, I threw out that joke metric of the number of walkable days by trying to change the weather. Imagine we were going to try a bunch of experiments there. We might not know today, can we control the weather or not? And we might actually have some good ideas we want to try, but through testing and how you execute on those tests, you're going to see if those ideas actually are helping you move the thing you want to move. And if you spend some time there and discover, oh wow, like not only are we not increasing the metric the way we wanted to, we're not moving it at all. That's often something you discover when you're building something for the first time. And so I think with all things, how you focus your resources to hit your goals is really important. Kind of what I like to do is spend some percentage of time on kind of big bets or areas we haven't focused on yet. And if we're not seeing actual movement there through the work we're doing, move on to the next idea.
Interesting. Yeah. How long would you recommend spending until you know it's not working?
That's a good question. I think depending on the maturity of the company, the team, the profitability, like all of those types of things, if you have the space, spending like 10 to 15% of resources on chasing those ideas, but still kind of like after 2 or 3 experiments, if it's not moving, trying in another direction, I think is a pretty good framework to follow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you.
Another thing I was wondering along the lines of just having the generic strategy. On the flip side, you said it should have clearly defined goals. Again, is that something that you feel should be driven by the leadership, or is it the same kind of situation where PMs can take it in their own hands?
Yeah, I think leadership driving goals is a great thing, and driving the conversation around goals is a great thing. I think ultimately you won't get a lot of freedom to execute if everyone's not bought in. But I think a lot of organizations work differently. I'm in kind of the enterprise SaaS space, which is very different than how we operated at Indeed, which was very kind of, here's our goals as a company, ladder up, what can everyone contribute? I think we're kind of focusing more on setting the goals and vision from the top and pulling them back down and working. We're a lot flatter and smaller, so we can work together on what can we execute on to try to hit those a little differently. So the size of the organization, I think, definitely matters, but I think the statement does stand though. If you're not getting the goals you need, set them and see if they stick.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Do you have other questions for Matt? Then I'll do one more question before we move on to shout outs. I know we have people from startups in the audience to like growth stage companies to larger enterprises. And you also mentioned that for smaller companies, you would recommend alternating focus based on the matrix, maybe every quarter or every year. Can you talk more about that, and what would be some of the strategies for startups or smaller companies?
Yeah, I think a lot of startups will be in different scenarios depending on their runway, right? Or are they profitable, right? Like those are all really hard things that startups have to deal with, and it's I think often hard to, especially as you pay attention to your runway and your burn rate, and you see like, oh man, if we don't hit these revenue growth numbers by this day, like we're going to be raising funding again, or I'm going to have to let people go, or those types of things. And so you can start to really kind of lean things towards your revenue metric. A lot of times startups have the privilege of having so many things in that sweet spot, that top right box of most things we are doing are increasing both our revenue and our value, because those are so tied so close together. It's why we started a startup. It's why we exist, right? And once those ideas start to move away is where you start to have to make those harder trade-offs. But I think you have to understand all those things to be able to pivot correctly. I think it's easy to try to draw a like really simple framework to say like, oh, well, I do this initiative towards this and then this initiative towards this. But I think in reality, you'd have a lot of whiplash. You're constantly changing your mind space and what you're focused on. As soon as you can get into teams that focus on the different things, I think is really, really helpful. But I would kind of just have the conversation. And I think with everything you do, don't kid yourself about what it's supposed to drive. Like really think through like what is going to happen if I build this thing, and is that okay that we focus on this?
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. Well, if you don't have any other questions, then maybe we can spend a couple minutes on shout outs. Again, if you are hiring in your company or if you're looking for opportunities yourself, you can share that. And feel free to drop your LinkedIn link into the chat or your email if you want to stay connected.
Oh, we have one more question.
Yeah, question from Lisa. How should a startup partner with a much bigger player in the same market and still have some leverage?
Oh, interesting. I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question. I think Indeed did this well a few times, but I think understand what your value is and what makes you unique. What's your strategic moat, and how do you stop a partner from really leveraging your value? So that's kind of my thought on it.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks again, Lisa, for the question. Well, if any questions come up during shout outs, you can also drop them in the chat. I know Matt mentioned in the beginning that Bertha is hiring product managers and engineers. So we could probably connect with Matt for those opportunities. If anyone else on the call for their company is hiring, please share that, or you're looking for a new job, a new opportunity, you can also let us know. Thank you, Prashant. And it's an Indeed link. Awesome.
Thanks for that.
All right. Well, I think we can then end earlier. I know that for our next events in June, we'll be highlighting some of our winners from the product awards that happened in March. So please check them out. We post all the events on Eventbrite and Meetup, so you can check the next event there.